Hi, this is Matt Hug with Nonprofit.Courses, and today also with the Nonprofit Career Network, a division of Great Careers Bang, the Business Executive Network Group. And today we are pleased to bring you Diane Leonard. Diane Leonard is a grant proposal expert. She is top in her field. She is also a person who is really giving to the profession. And today she is going to talk to us about grant proposal work and a career in grant proposal writing. And we bring this to you because so many people look at grant proposal writing as either a sideline career, a primary career, or is just a really useful skill if you are working in the nonprofit sector. And Diane can speak and will speak to all of those. So let's not wait and let's get started. Today we have with us Diane Leonard. And Diane is, what can I say? She's an expert in grant proposal writing and has a wonderful business doing that kind of work and much more in upstate New York, upstate New York, as she told us earlier. And I'm just going to leave it at that and let Diane tell us a little bit about herself, because I know you are a member of the Grant Professionals Association. You just did a presentation for them, and have a lot of other great credentials that maybe you'd want to go ahead and let everybody know.
Yeah, and so I've put together just a few slides to help everyone understand a little bit about my winding path, to maybe inspire some questions and stories about your own winding path. So as I pull up my PowerPoint, what I would love to hear from you in the chat box about is, do you love, like, or dislike grants? What's your starting feeling? Candid answer, no hard feelings one way or the other. In the chat box, you could go ahead and type in like, dislike, meh, maybe something in the middle.
Okay, we got a love here.
Well, as a fellow GPA member, I'm not surprised that Laura would give us a love. No pressure to continue that level of feeling.
Got another love here from an accountant, no less.
Yeah, like up in the game there, Kathy, with all the exclamation points. That's great. Yeah, meh, great. Some people prefer to work with the individual donors, for sure.
Yeah.
Want to get them. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Alicia, I agree with you. Like, restricted grants can be not just some strings you've got to worry about, but ropes for organizations. And so general operating is definitely, it's like the holy grail. That's what folks want.
In fact, I just referred to somebody to a video that talks about that. I'll put it in the chat later on. It'll be fun.
Oh, great. And some of you have never had experience with grants, so you don't have anything to weigh in on. Not a problem. So the reason I was curious to know your starting perspective is because usually when I walk into a room or into a Zoom room, and I'm not sure of everyone's background, when people hear that I'm a grant professional and this is what I do and my team does on purpose, full time, I get a mixed reaction in terms of facial expressions. Sometimes you can tell who are the Laura and Kathy's in the room. They're like, yeah, grants can help change the world, because they can. Some are like, if I have to. And other times there's a face, and this is being recorded, so you're welcome. And they're like, and I say, I believe perhaps you've had a stressful experience with grants before. And then the answer is usually yes, either from writing it or something went a little wonky with implementation, but something about it stressed them out, stressed their team out, stressed the organization out. So when I thought about Matt's offer to come talk with your group today and to think about grants as a career, and I started to look at, well, this is the formal bio. That's the St. Lawrence River that's behind me there in my headshot, standing right on the riverfront in Clayton and the Thousand Islands. And as I thought about what does it mean to me now to be a grant professional? Well, I'm a grant professional certified. I'm an approved trainer for the Grant Professionals Association. Neither of those bullets guarantees grant funding. I wish that there was such a silver bullet or magic pill, but neither of those does that. But those are things that have become very important in my path for me. But there's some other really unique parts of my story here in bullets that I'm going to walk you through the winding path. And then I'd love to kind of hear from you at different stages about your work as well. So we'll talk about being a grant maker and what it looks like now, but it's that last bullet. We're going to start there. For me, it's all about self-care, trying to do things in a sustainable pace. It doesn't always work. Sometimes it takes an extra hour or two here or there, but every day, what is it that's recharging me? Running and coffee. And not because the coffee is fueling me with the caffeine. I love the act of brewing the coffee and the smell and the taste. It jazzes me up. The caffeination's a nice side benefit. But the good news for you is that I've already run out in the sunshine this morning. Glorious day. The lilacs are out here in Clayton. Quite a pungent smell. It was great, but beautiful to look at as I'm going along. The birds were singing, and I've had plenty of coffee. So as we get started, I wanted to talk about the winding path that I find myself, my team, and fellow grant professionals or grant writers often talk about. How did you get into grants? The stories are almost always different, but I'm not sure that that's really that unique just to grants in the nonprofit field. I find that regardless of what your title is, what you want your title to be, that there's some sort of winding path that brings us into nonprofit work. It's a smaller segment that went to school, had a specific degree, could see the path clearly that they were going to take into the nonprofit sector. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my winding path, but then I'd like to hear from you about yours and where you think it may have started. So we're going to go back and we're going to time warp for a minute. And we're going to go back to the days when I was an undergrad at Cornell University. And when I was accepted, I also got this secondary letter a little while later that said, "Congratulations, you've been accepted to the Cornell Tradition Fellowship." I didn't know what that meant. What I did understand was that I was going to get $500 a year towards books. Didn't quite cover it, but it was appreciated nonetheless. And to maintain it, I had to do community service. I was like, well, all right, not bad, right? It beat the job that I had cataloging things at the library for some of the ways we'd pay for things. But the reason I got that in the first place was because of the community service that they saw in my application. Being an officer at National Honor Society, volunteering and working at the Muscular Dystrophy Association as a high schooler. They saw all that, and that's how then they pull from applications to award you the fellowships. So I'm like, all right, well, to keep my book money, I've got to be involved in nonprofits here too. But as I got going and trying to think about what I was going to do, I decided pre-law was just not for me, wasn't going to be my thing. And the fellowship had an interesting side benefit, not just the book money, but the ability for every fellow to create an internship of their design anywhere in the world with a nonprofit or a charity, and to have those living expenses paid for that period of time. So there was a max to it, but you could do okay if you were going to maybe eat a lot of ramen over the course of a summer or a long break. And so as I thought about what that might look like, I wasn't too sure, didn't take advantage of it right away, did some volunteer work in different organizations, ended up serving as the fundraiser for the Cornell FSAE race team. That's why I've got the picture of our world championship team from our senior year. I'm in that picture. I actually got to drive the car just once, not in competition, but they taught me how to weld. I've never gotten to use that skill again. And I helped them raise more than $30,000 in corporate sponsorships so that what the university didn't contribute in advisorship and some of the like machine shop resources, et cetera, we could still build the car. And I liked fundraising, and I liked working with the corporate sponsors, and I liked the cross-functional team. And I was trying to think about what else is happening in philanthropy. So I decided, wouldn't it be interesting if I could have an internship in a grant making organization. What does this really mean? I'm not 100% sure. I'm applying for this funding, some sponsorship, some grants. I don't really get what that's like for those organizations. So I wrote a letter, like a real letter, and I had to print it and put it in the mail with a stamp. And I sent it to the Michigan Women's Foundation because I thought I'd like to live in Ann Arbor for a summer. I thought that would be a fun place to try. I didn't grow up in Michigan. It was one of those like just moments like that. I like the way this foundation looks. I liked the idea of gender-focused funding, so supporting women and girls programming. I sent them a letter. And Peg Talbert, so the image on the right-hand side of the slide, she thought, free intern focused on community service and fundraising. Sure, it was very different. They were used to getting interns that were from social work programs at the University of Michigan. That was actually their normal funnel for interns. But the fact that I had a stipend to pay for living expenses, and I was super excited. I guess I wrote a good letter. Peg said, come on out. It was the best summer. Not only did I learn and meet and talk to all these other foundations, I didn't realize Michigan was a philanthropic hub. I hadn't thought about Kellogg, Kresge, Mott, Ford Foundation, it's where it was started, Ford Motor Company Fund, still there, GM Foundation. The list is huge for big foundations that are based or were started in Michigan. So I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. And then the stars aligned. And their program officer, so full-time program officer managing all their grants, she was planning to retire. Wasn't real sure of the timeline. And the way it worked out, they decided that she was going to then stay for the next academic year. This was between my junior and senior year. And they offered me the full-time role of program officer upon graduation. I said yes. I was like, this is great. So that was the start of my winding path. I would have never guessed, getting the letter for $500 book award, that it would turn into a mentored first fundraising real gig as an undergrad, raising that much money under the leadership of Professor George, who's on the left-hand side, and still a great mentor to me today. And then all of a sudden I'm a grant maker. Would have never guessed. So I'm curious, when you think about and you look way back on your career, does anyone want to share in the chat box or give us a little snippet of where you think, if you look back on your winding path, where did it start?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm just fill in a little bit while folks are considering that. Mine started with the Boy Scouts and the fact that I was working in scouting in one kind of position, actually at a retail store, and somebody said, hey, you ought to be looking at being a professional scouter. And then I went from there to working for a small college, and I would not have been considered for the college job if not for the scouting job, and somebody just saying, you look pretty good with that. So yeah, just and that brought me into fundraising and more. And doing grant proposal writing or fundraising is one of these things that nobody says, hey, I want to do that when I grow up. Now, Colleen, well, it looks like she started as a literacy tutor, took over the program coordinator position.
Yeah, and I see Lynn reinvented yourself 6 times. That's definitely, I think, and that's part of the fun. I think that's what's great is that you don't have to be static in the nonprofit sector. There's so many different paths the career can take where you can follow your passions.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, it is. Fun is the journey.
One of the things that I've found is, like Colleen was saying there, that a lot of people start in the program area and they're asked to, can you write a proposal, or they're assigned because nobody else wants to do it, and they find out they're pretty good at it.
Yep, I agree. And one of the things that I learned after the fact, so here are lessons I learned about from being a grant maker, and I'll tell you about this in a second, but I didn't get the memo. I never learned the lesson that once you become a grant maker, usually people retire as a grant maker, right? Like that's something that people aspire to. It's what they're working on for their path. I did it in the opposite order. I've never been traditional in any regard. And so why I'm like, I'll just do it differently. Instead, I was the youngest program officer in the state. And so when they did task forces around diversity, guess who had the seat there as the voice of youth? I was like, well, all right. If it means I get to sit here and meet the colleagues from these different big foundations and learn and work with them, I'm all in. Right? I had no problem doing that. But there's more that I learned during the time. And
now, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just looking at Jawanda and Laura both have some interesting things there. Jawanda's bittersweet. It looks like started at a funeral when a young a boy, 12-year-old, committed suicide. And then Laura, right, undergrad at Penn State, a volunteer experience like you had.
Oh, but I'm like, MSW, U of M, I'm like, oh my gosh, we're talking about all the Michigan things. Very fun, tiny little world. Oh yeah. See, and these are all the things, like we love how different the paths are that bring us into this work. And it's why I think it's so much fun. Like if you're at a Grant Professionals Association meeting or conference, no two stories are alike, none of them. And it's what makes the field, to me, so fun to hear and learn from each other. I think it's fantastic. So, which community foundation, Colleen? I'm like, now we're all about Michigan for a second.
Oh, that's Plains County, so way down at the bottom by the Indiana border, right on I-69.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't hear which county you said.
Branch.
Oh, yes. Wonderful. So you're going to love the image I have on the next slide.
All right.
Actually, Laura's going to like it too. We'll have you both maybe weigh in on this image in a second. Well, there's two things I learned from being a grant maker I learned more than two. But as I think about two of the biggest things that influenced what I was considering for my next step, the first is that there would always be more great ideas, more proposals than there were dollars. That imbalance in the equation would always exist because nonprofits are like, well, we need resources to do our great things, and they have great ideas. And so therefore they would spend the time. And in those days we were still receiving hard copy proposals. So UPS and FedEx would show up before the deadlines and there would be stacks of things to read. Always had a lot of paper cuts. We were piloting online applications at the time. So that's the one thing I learned. And that does help sometimes to soothe the rejection if an application for a client isn't funded. But the other was that, it's one thing to say there's a deferential, we defer and we see the power that the grant makers have in relation to nonprofits. They have the money, we want the money. And we might say, well, we as a nonprofit have the programs, the services, we're doing the good work that you want to see happen. So you might argue that it could balance a little, but the imbalance that's there, what it creates in the sector, it's not just about the immediate action that the nonprofit's taking to apply or the way that they spend time in relationship building and applying, but that it's actually pervasive and sometimes harmful in their program design, that it sometimes is misdirecting efforts in a way that could be better spent creating impact in a community. And so I'm not getting quite on the big soapbox that Voulay of Nonprofit AF does. I'm just getting on a little step towards the soapbox. But this lesson, I could start to see, I'm like, well, I'm on this side. But hold on, I think there's something about this that isn't sustainable. I don't think we've gotten to the right answer yet. Things are getting better in some situations. But I decided, again, because I didn't get the memo that you retire as a grant maker, I said, I'm going to go to the other side.
So just to pause there for a second, you used a word that spoke a lot to that last point, which you were referring to the applicants as clients. Was that just?
That was if I was saying now, like clients that we work with.
Okay.
I was referring to those that we work with now.
Okay, no, that's fine, because I mean, how do they see that relationship, or do they call them clients? Do they call them? I mean, that whatever that label is, I think speaks a lot to how that that relationship works.
I agree. We always referred to them as grantees or potential grantees. That was always the language that we used internally and within our peer groups. Yeah. So I decided to go to the other side to see what it felt like, to see what sort of impact I could have if I could make grants less stressful. It was stress. Yes, it's stressful to have to make grant decisions, no doubt, right? Because there's more things than you can grant money to, but it's a different kind of stress. Let's be honest, different kind of stress. And so the Alzheimer's Association, the Greater Michigan chapter, they serve 60 of the 82 counties in Michigan. They had a position open for a foundation and relations coordinator that would serve their whole territory. And our family has, on both my husband's side and mine, has a history of dementia or other related diseases. And so that, okay, I can see that I've got some personal connection. I could have some passion. I think I could write about this. I could learn and take my skills. I'd lived in Michigan long enough at this point. So Colleen, Laura, this is for you. I knew that when I went places in Michigan, where do you live on the MIT, right? I'm like, I live here, or where am I going? And I would point. And I'd been traveling the state for the foundation because the Michigan Women's Foundation was statewide. So I'd been pretty much everywhere except for some of the nooks and crannies in the Upper Peninsula. So understanding just a little bit about the difference in the 60 counties was important because each county might have some unique funders that only wanted to fund in their area. Some didn't care. Some would fund the whole state. Some would fund a region or two regions. But it was important, I thought, at the time to have an understanding of the community I was going to serve as a whole. So I felt like I had some knowledge about that 60 county area and to have passion so that I felt comfortable writing about the work. I've since learned that I don't need to know everything or be dangerously knowledgeable about the geography. And I don't need to have that very personal connection in order to write well to help someone get the money. But at the time, that's where I felt very comfortable. There was enough dangerous knowledge that I'm like, I think I could sit here and write a compelling grant. It turned out that was a good theory. We raised millions of dollars in my years with them, expanding beyond their current foundation base, working with the state to get some new collaborative grants, securing federal funds. It was a lot of fun. There's a lot of pressure, though, I learned, when you're thinking about the people's salaries that you're writing for. If we don't get this continuation grant, what happens? How are they going to be maintained as a position? That's a decision that's above your pay grade, but there's a lot of pressure in that. And also, if we don't get this money, what happens to these services? Our headquarters it was in Southfield, Michigan. And within the office, they had renovated a central portion and put the adult day program right within it. And so literally kitty corner from my office, maybe 150 feet max, was the security door entrance where participants of the adult day program would go in and out as their caregivers brought them in for the day. And so I would get them grant funding for an art therapy program, music therapy, operations, respite care scholarships, all sorts of funding for the program, for their caregivers. And in seeing the participants and their caregivers literally every day, because I'd walk to the kitchen or walk to the front office and you'd constantly encounter the participants. I was working on an application with the staff and they were talking about how they were interested in starting a knitting club. I said, okay, so I'm terrible, but I have all of Grandma Horry's old yarn and needles. She had passed away just a year before. I'm like, I have everything. I'm terrible at it, but I'd have a lot of fun. It was the favorite thing I did every week was to walk from my little grant office across the hall. They kept all the needles and the yarn. And actually, they would remind me the participants who would sit there and they remind me of what the stitches were that I was supposed to do. I don't think I ever got beyond a scarf that was a few inches long, right? That wasn't the point of it. I can't remember a thing that I relearned back then, but it got really personal now when I wrote about the program.
You know, one of the things that I've had people tell me who are grant professionals, like you were right in that thick of things, was that pressure, and that they have sought mental health therapy because of that pressure, and some of them have left because they didn't like to be the point person, especially when that was the only way that their nonprofit was getting money. It wasn't diversified, and that really made them feel like, it's them or nothing.
It's true. And there's 4 colleagues of ours. Laura, as a GPA member, might have heard of their work. There has been a lot of research going on in the last 2 years about burnout within the grant profession. Jonna Rogers, Bethany Planton, Trish Bachman, and Patricia DuBois, they did a first round of research that was published in the Grant Professional Association Journal, proving that burnout was real in grant professionals. And then the second survey that they conducted earlier this year that will be published then in the future was digging into causes and ways that it's identified. And part of it is about the pressure to get the funding, right? And that folks will do heroic things because they see the need with the staff for salary for the programs, whether it's, an Alzheimer's adult day program, a school, a healthcare setting. Especially in the pandemic, the pressure has been so high to handle the fire hose volume of opportunities, right? How many COVID emergency grants can you apply for in 1 week? That feels like the challenge that has been posed to many of us.
It also represents, I'll call it ethics temptations. Because cutting corners or doing things because you think, well, it'll just, nobody will worry about that when it's really a problem, and that in itself is an issue.
Mm-hmm. And so as I think about my path, one of the things that has been really helpful for me and is what I return to frequently is Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why. Has anyone here read the book? Maybe you want to give a show of hands in the chat box, Y for yes, N for no. Has anyone read this book? It's one of my favorites. In fact, any video that Simon Sinek puts out that's on LinkedIn is always going to be one that I will pause and watch. Really respect his approach to work, to talking about leadership. So definitely a recommended read from our team. And when I think about starting with why, so why do we want to do this work? What is it we're trying to achieve?
Folks have read it, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of the ones that's right here. Like there's lots of books in this office. It's got a reserved spot in this section here because it's one of the ones that I'll reach for and talk about when I'm presenting or talk about if we're doing agile training. Starting with why, if we're thinking about our careers and what we can do, I think it's really powerful as a reminder. And
Diane, excuse me.
Oh, yes.
Did you say the name of the book is Why?
Start with Why. Starts
with Why. Okay, thank you.
Yes. And so my professional why comes back to remember that I won't make it a second time, but the beautiful stressed face that people make when I walk in a room and they hear I'm a grant professional, the one where they're not loving grants, usually there's been something stressful. So the theory of I think we can do this without grants stressing us out. That became the tagline. My business, Diane Leonard Consulting and Grant Writing Services, we've been around for more than 15 years now, which, obviously I started the business when I was 5, so no problem. It's all right. I know what it means, but that's been our tagline since then because my professional why was driving. I've seen both sides. And I think this could be done in a way that is not as stressful. I think this could be done in a way that doesn't force us to do heroic things in terms of late days, working weekends. I couldn't, turns out, do all-nighters in college. Never did it. It was like, nope, done. Can't even. Have no words left. Time to go to bed. Couldn't do it when I had very young children. Why should I try to do it with something that takes deep intellect now? Nope, never. So to me, saying, don't let grants stress you out is the core of my professional why. I want to create good in the world. And it's around this idea that grants and the funding mechanism that nonprofits are facing, it doesn't have to stress the organization out. So with that explanation about my professional why, if you're willing, this is absolutely optional, but if you're willing and you want to share your professional why, I'd love to hear it. Whether you want to unmute and say it, Matt, maybe you want to kick us off, no pressure, or if you want to put it in the chat box.
Yeah, anybody, what's driving you that way?
This is Kathy. I'll start since poor Matt always has to start.
Thank you.
I got involved with nonprofits about 15 years ago. I was working for an organization that did outsourced accounting and bookkeeping services. So I had not worked as an accountant with a nonprofit. My gigs had all been for-profit entities. But this organization was just starting up in Philadelphia. I was one of the first accountants that they hired. And my first couple of clients were ones whose, nonprofit missions were great, but their books were a mess. And anyone who's worked in the grant field knows that when you get a grant, you have to be able to track that grant properly, and you have to be able to report back to the grant making organization how you use the money, and they need a financial statement. So if you can't do that, you're never going to get grants from those folks again. So I started helping people figure out how to take their mess of a books and turn it into a system where they can track. And those organizations then were a lot more successful in getting additional grants, or even getting grants if they had been unsuccessful in the past. So fast forward now to where I am. My primary gig is the director of finance at the YWCA of Bucks County. I do have some other side gigs too, but wanted to speak specifically about this one. What I have found that has been profoundly helpful to this organization is that I have gotten very good at managing the grants. So I understand, number one, during the proposal, what they are looking for. And I have been told sometimes that the grant making organization looks at your budget first, because they can tell right away whether you have a grip on what you want to do. I mean, it's wonderful if you want to say you want to save the world, but you have to give them specific steps on how you're going to save the world and what it's going to cost to save the world. So if you can put together a good, solid budget that backs up what your proposal is, it's going to give you a leg up on winning that grant. And once you have won the grant, you have to be able to track that and report back in whatever format that grant maker wants. And the better way you do it, if you're really good at doing that, they're actually going to come to you when there's other opportunities and say, hey, we have money. Give us a budget, give us a program narrative, and we'll give you more. We got into the rapid rehousing area about 4 years ago. It's a program where they're taking people that are either homeless or at risk of homelessness and helping them to get into housing with a subsidy. So they're government grants, they're passed through, in our instance, from the state or federal resources into the county. But we had never done anything in this area before. We are about helping women and families and children, reach economic success, but we had never tried a program like this. I remember sitting around a table talking about how we would do this, what we're going to need in terms of staffing and resources, and put in a tiny proposal for about a $40,000 grant. And lo and behold, we ended up winning that grant. And now we're putting in proposals for $400,000 grants, and we're winning them. So you get your solid foundation in place, you get the people in place that are good writers, that are good accountants, and you can really make a difference.
And Kathy, I'll say the habit I developed when I was a grant maker was indeed budget first. And when I serve as a reviewer now, it still is always the first thing, because it tells the whole story before you ever read one word. So I agree 100%. And congratulations on the way that you've learned how to handle the process, because it can be stressful and burdensome. To Alicia's point in the chat box, it can be overwhelming and burdensome. It takes a great deal of effort to systematize it in a way that it doesn't stress the team, and that it actually has a return on investment for the organization, right? Like, it's a fine line. It's not a win for all organizations. You've got to be careful.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is stressful. Sometimes the turnaround that they require, hey, the application window opens tomorrow. We need your budget and your narrative by Thursday. And it's like, oh, great. But, once you get a system in place and you kind of know what you need in terms of staffing and supplies and resources, and you have a good system, you can really put something together pretty quickly.
But also, to Alicia's point here, I think it's what you've pointed out, Diane, is how important grants are in just forming ideas and crystallizing direction for an organization. When somebody is forced to, whether it's a grant proposal or you're talking to a donor of some sort, to make your case, to make sure that the numbers line up, to do all these things, which is a really good exercise, so that the organization knows the direction it's going. That's huge. So I know it's a pain, and I know it would be great to have the money just there because everybody's doing great work, but it organizes your thoughts, and that makes a big difference.
Yeah, there are side benefits to having an application, even if it's denied, right? If you didn't have a logic model before, but it kind of forced the team to sit down and have one, or you didn't have a clean project budget before, but now you do. Those are some long-term artifacts that you have that can still help an organization. And I'm loving how, so Colleen's statement mixed personal and professional into one why. I love it. I separated them on my slides. I'd like to introduce you. Here's my family. And office puppy Ollie. It's an important part of the why. So my why, related to the way I structure my work, has been driven by my family, in the sense that my children are much older now. Actually, they're nearly my height. And this picture isn't that old. It's only a few months, but beside the point. When I think about why am I doing this work, how do I want to structure the work, they're at the root of it. So am I thinking about, like, we just submitted a grant related to some enhancements at their school. I was so honored that our team got to do something that was directly related to our family. That's very rare, being a national firm, that it might actually impact my daily life. So that was a huge, huge honor. But when I think about what I want work to look like, I want to, focus on how we can change the world and model that for my children. But I want to have the flexibility to create a life that gives me options. And they're part of why I'm always like, oh, time for the heroic stuff to not even start. Time to be done. It's nice outside. It's the end of the day. Somebody's hungry, the puppy, a child, me. But they definitely continue to drive me to see how can we make the world better. And actually, my oldest daughter just finished a climate science elective and is having so much fun educating and increasing awareness related to climate science issues, that she's trying to think about now how to fundraise for some changes within her school. And I thought, well, see what you've learned from listening over the years. Perhaps there will be a summer project where maybe you will write a grant to someone to help the school get rid of some of their not quite sustainable kitchen practices. Who knows, right? It might be an interesting mix of the professional and personal why, taking the next step. But whether your personal and your professional are mixed, the one thing that I've learned in the 15 years in business is that, I started as a freelancer, hung a shingle out. It was me. Full name, but it was me. And that was what worked for me at the time. But as business grew and as my why expanded a little bit, and I thought about what I loved and that I like talking to others and teaching and traveling, it was lonely too. I really wanted to be surrounded by awesome other grant professionals. And so I found other like-minded professionals that agreed that grants didn't have to be stressful, that we could meet our personal and professional whys together, and started to expand into a team. Because I think one of the most common questions that I can predict an answer to is if I'm talking to folks that have grants in their title, I say, do you have a grant team? And more than half will usually say no. Well, this is a team of grant professionals. This truly is, right? But this isn't in a nonprofit. That's unusual.
Well, that team isn't just other grant writers. It could also be research people. It could be other folks who do other things that are connected to that proposal process.
Exactly. And it's the definition of what a grant team is that's often missing, especially if someone's new in the grant field, right? They've decided they were in program, they're going into grants, or they were in fundraising and they're going to niche into grants. If no one has told them, because it's not like you're getting a degree in grants. If no one has said a grant team is the group of professionals that have a stake in seeing grants be successful, if no one said that out loud to them, it is an incredibly isolating field. You are probably the only one in your organization. And so you feel a lot of pressure on your shoulders to get it done. You feel the pressure back to that salary, the program delivery, those that are being served, which is why then the burnout conversation, I think, becomes so important that I mentioned for that study that's been done. So one of the things I've been trying to do is increase the definition and understanding of what a grant team is. This is not actually what it usually looks like. If we were instead, we would label and say accountant, data manager, vice president of programs, right? That's the sort of grant team that a grant professional is more likely to find in their scenario that would support getting the work done, reducing the stress together, making it a sustainable grant-seeking strategy. So that is, I think, part of the big soapbox that we're on. Matt, I know for all the work you do in education, when you think about grant teams, what are other ways that you've described it?
Well, I think of, grant proposals as not just being the person who writes, and like you said, these other folks, but also communicating with the funders and foundation relations, and having them know you, as our mothers would have told us, our reputation precedes us, right?
Yeah.
And to build that reputation, because Leonard, maybe you can speak to this a little bit, how much your connections to, or I should say your clients' connections to their potential funders makes a difference in what their success in getting grants.
Yeah, for sure. So part of the fun then of having the team and getting to always reinvent. So I think to Lynn's point, you said 6 times you've reinvented yourself in your career. I decided I'm not going to count the different ways that we reinvent or add to or take little side paths within the business. Because as the owner, if we find something that's a cool priority that meets our mission to not let grants stress us out, I'm like, let's try that. Right? And so on this screen are some of the different ways that we've had fun beyond the writing support that's going to help the group we're working with, which is incredibly important to us. But we're also like, well, how can we help more people understand the grant team idea, decrease grant stress, break down the silos, make it so that we've got connections. And so these are some of the things that we've had fun doing that honestly, I think have helped to keep me super excited about being a grant professional. Do I write every day? No, definitely not. Not the way that things are going right now, spending time training or doing things, but I can pick and be like, I want to write today. Or like I co-founded the Twitter chat grant chat with good friend and colleague Joe Miller. I guess it would be 9 years ago now that that's been around. Super fun way to connect. It's how actually some of the folks who work with us now in our team, it's how I first met them. We've had fun working with partners at Foundant. We now offer, this will go back to my running, which I mentioned at the beginning. When I run, I have ideas, and sometimes they're good ideas. Sometimes they just end in the pile of like, it seemed like an okay idea, but we leave it alone. The Learn Grants Online Summit, this one stuck, was running at the GPA conference in DC. So this would have been 2 years ago. And I was like, I think that we need to do something bigger to celebrate International Grant Professionals Day. Does anyone know what day that is on the calendar? It's a consistent day. I'll tell you. It's the second Friday in March every year. And so Danny Blitch, another certified grant professional, is the one who first had that idea. It's been around for probably 8 years now. The Learn Grants Online Summit, though, we just had our second annual in March. So I had this idea while running. I'm like, I think that we could do an online summit. I think it could be free, and I think we could make it open to anyone that has interest in grants. That was like the caffeinated running idea. So I went to my friend who is running Grant Hub, which is a product of Foundant. I'm like, Tammy, I think I've got a good idea. And the Foundant team thankfully agreed. And so we had more than 3,500 grant professionals with us this year on International Grant Professionals Day, learning from a huge range. I mean, Bev Browning, like the founder of the grant consultant field. I really think she was one of the first. Her stories, talk about her winding path. Oh my gosh, you should have her on sometime. My favorite story that she tells is about how she used to leave business cards literally everywhere that she went, including anywhere in an airport, just kind of leave a little pile. You might not know Bev by name, but you might know her if you've ever looked at Grant Writing for Dummies. That's Bev.
Okay.
Delightful resource. She's still, as her why has changed over the years, and now she's very much into mentoring and coaching. But she was one of the speakers at Learn Grants. So my point in sharing some of these stories, what is the path? How is life changing? Our latest change is in Agile in nonprofits. As grant professionals, maybe the day we started, I know I wasn't like, oh, I'm a project manager too. Oh, I didn't take project management classes. I was like, so learning on the fly. I had taken organizational behavior classes. So the whole Agile conversation about team values and the organizational work there, that all was natural to me. But thinking about Agile and specific frameworks in nonprofits, that was a newer idea for us about 6 years ago. And so we started Agile in nonprofits in 2018. We've actually been working with Scrum Inc. to bring credential classes into nonprofits. But it's just one of those, like, it's a passion-driven project connected to our why that has helped reduce the stress level for grants and our clients, which, well, it's right back to the heart of Simon Sinek's book. So it's just, like I said, a few of the examples for how I've decided I like to work with other people. How can we help other people? What are the networks? I think the Grant Professionals Association is the best thing that I ever spent money on, because the day I went to that conference in Indianapolis, I realized I wasn't alone. Now with online stuff, it might not take going to a conference to realize there's other grant pros like us, but it took me getting on a plane and going to that conference to realize there were other awesome people who also thought grants could be cool. And so that network has a huge value still for friendships and professional networking. Whether, groups like this, little groups, big groups, finding your people helps to keep it from being such an isolating, writing focused job.
So Diane,
Question.
your last slide showed everybody, there together, but that's, they don't all live in upstate New York. Is that right?
That is very true.
And-
That happened to be, and that's not everyone that has worked with us or does work with us. It was the handful of folks that were at the Grant Professionals Association conference actually, that was the DC one, so 2 years ago. So enough people had gone to the conference, like, we're all here in one, stand still, right? Usually everybody's individual little headshots because we span all the time zones. So it's rare that you would find a DH Leonard crew, logoed or not, standing near each other, pandemic or not.
So talk for a second, if you could, about the opportunity for remote work in this field. I mean, it looks like folks, like you said, are everywhere, can be everywhere.
And I've always been a remote freelancer. So there was already the base there before I ever had a subcontractor or an employee. And it's just become easier to do so. So when we brought on our first subcontractor out 8 years ago, I was like, okay, how does this work? We were already using Dropbox a little, trying to figure out, like, thinking about the tools. Thankfully, the tools have all made it so much easier that we just live in Drive and Slack. Those are our two things. And our clients are in the same things with us. And honestly, things now we don't look weird thanks to the pandemic.
Yeah.
I'll go with a silver lining. People used to say, well, you're not all together. We used to get that question maybe in January of 2020. No one asks us that anymore. No one is like, where are you? And where's Judy? Wait, where's Bethany? It's like a fun get to know you question. Instead, they don't assume that you all have to be together in order to provide great service. So I'll take that for a win. And I saw earlier in the chat box, and I'll have to scroll back up. Oh, Alicia is the PMP. When we think about what it looks like for project management and needing to be together, but more importantly, the tools that teams use for their project management, honestly, any tool, pick Asana, Trello, Jira, any of them, they've all gotten so much better in the last 14 months. That has been another huge silver lining for an already remote team to see. I mean, all organizations had to double down on what did their structure look like. So some of the tools really have exceeded expectations. It's been awesome to see those changes. It's made our life even better. And we were already happy, but now it's tool-wise and acceptance-wise as a remote team. Like I said, I'm a glass half full sort of person. It made some stuff better for us.
That's great. I'm sorry, Lynn, it sounded like you had a question.
I sure do. So, is there such a thing as a grant writing certification? And do people have to do an example of a grant in order to get certified? And if so, is there a place where we could put an application in to see if somebody was interested in our why? You know, our why is basically everybody should have an opportunity to earn an income. So we're dealing with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, with the basic bottom physiological needs. You got to have food to do anything else in life. So if you, I don't know, I guess I see a lot of people give money to organizations that are kids, vets, and pets. Well, we don't fall into any of that. But when I think about being on an airplane, they always tell you to put the oxygen mask on the adult first. So when I think of our organization, it's the oxygen mask on the adult first, giving the adult food so that they can learn and go out and earn an income to buy their own fish rather than being a food pantry giving, giving the fish. So we're empowering adults with career education so they can get a job. And when they have the money and they can feed themselves, then they can also give to the vets and pets and kids. But trying to convince people, that we're like potentially the best source to start, it's challenging. It is definitely challenging. So I'd love any feedback you've got.
Yeah. Well, and I think so we're a generalist firm, so we work in the areas you've mentioned, areas like yours, healthcare. Sitting from any chair as a grant professional in any one particular focus area, there's always something that's good about yours for finding funding. And then you look at the others and you're like, oh, but they have fill in the blank. And that's what there are funders that are across all the areas. It really is about being selective and saying, well, I'm never going to be this, and I'm just not going to worry about those funders. But there's an advantage that anyone can bring to a funder with the right one. And I agree with your story for what you are doing for empowerment. I think about, the Cabrini Health Foundation is a good example. Although they only focus in New York, they absolutely provide basic services, like basic needs supports, always there. But the programs they really like and what they encourage, what are the things that are going to change the system? What are the things that are going to yes, let's make sure everyone has what they need right now, but what are we doing to change what's going to happen? And so those are the sort of funders that, right, we need to look for in a situation like yours. But you started with a question about certifications and classes. So there's a few options. So there's classes like Grant Writing Bootcamp, certificate class, the Grantsmanship Center, certificate class, participation. Right? The American, I hope I don't get it too wrong. The American Grant Writers Association is a professional membership. It is also a completion certificate, but people will say that they have a credential. It's course-based, as are these others. But it's a great way to get started. Any of them are, so that you have some base knowledge. And
there's also academic programs. I mean, I teach a grant proposal writing class. And so that's.
Yes. And I would put that one in like the middle stage, right? Because the classes I mentioned are like a few afternoons or like 2 days, right? So short term, get a certificate. The academic programs, I've got a bunch of colleagues across the country that teach at community colleges doing adult ed type classes. There's what you teach. There's a wide range. And to me, those are a slightly bigger commitment to learn the basics. And then there's the far end. So those of us that are grant professional certified, that you can't be eligible for that until you have been in the field for X number of years and secured X number of dollars. So that is a later in your career thing that some choose to go after. There's about 400 of us in the country. Some employees do it because it does show in the salary report each year that if you have it, you tend to be able to garner a higher salary. As a consultant, honestly, the reason I have it, and many of our colleagues on our team have it, when folks talk about grants, what is that? This is what it means to be a grant professional. This is what it means. To say to a well-intentioned nonprofit saying, can I pay you a % once I get it? Oh, no, I'm sorry. Our code of ethics says this, and I'd lose my credential if I did. Stops the conversation. And either they figure something out or we help them find another creative solution. But, so there's a few reasons why folks would go after it. But my point is there's a range of ways that people advance their skills in grants that they can, use then to say, look at all I've done to learn best practices so that I can be stronger and hopefully secure more money. But it really depends on everyone's path for what they do.
Is there a template for starting the process if you never have written a grant before? Is there something online?
Sort of. So yes, if you start to Google grant templates, what you'll find is, or what you should consider using, it would be a general structure. We do one in our charity how-to classes. There's you're going to have to talk about your need. You're going to have to talk about your program description. You're going to have to talk about how you will measure your success. What does your organization do? So you can find some of the basic categories you'll write about. Bev's book is a good one with an outline.
I might have one on Nonprofit.Courses. I think Holly Rustick put one up.
Yes. Oh, and she's got a great podcast. That would be a great place.
Yeah.
We have a number of free downloads on our website at DH Leonard Consulting. We do not, on purpose, put up a specific template, and I'll explain why. We do not encourage organizations to have a boilerplate application, because if they have that, they may choose to then take it and quickly send it out to lots of foundations and not customize it to the grant maker, which, having been a grant maker, they can spot it from a mile away. So it's our philosophy that if I put a template out there, people, despite even the fine print, people might use it and throw spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. And we want to discourage that. So if anything, what we like to see is that folks use, as you apply for the first one, now you've got some narrative. You apply to a second one. Oh, now you've got two different lengths and two different things. We encourage folks to build a narrative library. So anyway, long-winded answer about your template, but couldn't resist the soapbox opportunity to just caution against boilerplates and why we don't have one.
Diane, this is Colleen. As a former grant maker, I agree with you. And I equate it to looking for a job. You don't just throw a resume out, you customize it. I mean, it's the same basic, skills and your why and your, what you're doing kind of thing, but you customize it to the job, and you do the same thing when you're writing a grant, because you have to understand what that foundation goals are, what they typically, there's a lot of research that goes into that, just as there is when you're applying for the job. What's the company's why? What's the grant maker's why? And would you also suggest that, much like looking for a job, it's about networking and making connections inside the grant making organization, and reaching out and say, hey, so that I don't waste my time or yours, this is my idea. Is there something, is this anything that you would consider? Because then you may have somebody get excited, if it's a program officer or something like that, and go, yes, please, here's the application and here's how to fill it out. You might even have that kind of thing happen. Would you agree with that or not?
100%. Actually, I'll go 110% if you don't mind. So when we get calls from well-intentioned, very passionate organizations, like, I think we need some help. I think we need to rewrite whatever they've got. Like, hold on, we're not touching narrative yet. Let's rewind. Let's talk about your whole grant life cycle, and let's talk about what you're doing on relationship building. And the number one thing we're going to find in most cases is that they are not doing exactly what you just described. They are not trying to email a funder. They're not trying to talk to them on the phone. They're not playing the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon to find some sort of connection. It doesn't mean you have to have coffee or go to a golf club and find somebody. It doesn't need to be at that level, but just to even have the conversation. Many just don't understand that it's okay, that it's encouraged. And the way you described it, Colleen, where you don't want to waste your time and you don't want to waste theirs. It's to the benefit of both. Don't add to their pile to review and don't spend your time writing it. Absolutely.
I think too, going back to one of your very first points, there isn't always enough money.
No, unfortunately not.
I mean, at the community foundation, I had a bunch of small funds. And if you're doing, if you want to do animal spaying and neutering, I might not have any funding for that, or I might have one and the grant might be, $500 that year. That might be all that fund could give. And so then you also want to be honest with the grantee or potential grantees, like, okay, but is that going to even help you? And so that's where having a discussion inside, I think, is very beneficial.
Absolutely. And I will say, community foundations as a rule are probably one of the most open categories of grant makers for having conversations. Right? We know that there's plenty of foundations that don't have capacity or preference to communicate. Community foundations, if I were just to gamble, they are the most likely to talk about or to be willing to have a conversation out of all the grant makers, which is to the benefit of the community itself. And that's why they make, I think, that preference available. But yeah, totally agree. Relationships are probably the most underutilized part of the grant life cycle for some organizations.
Well, any other questions? Because I know I want to respect Diane's time. And boy, you just got right to the next thing I was going to ask, how people get a hold of you. That's excellent. I also, just as a little bit of fun here, I'll put up a link to a humorous video that, I don't know, Diane, have you ever seen Everyone Deserves a Fair Slice?
No.
You'll have to check out, I just put it in the comment, the chat there. It's fun. It's how if you were a pizza restaurant and was approached by a grant funder.
I will have to check that one out. I just saved the whole chat so that I can check out all the things that were said in case I missed anything, because what I thought you were going to put in there, Matt, I thought you were going to give a plug for your own conversation when we talked about not treating funders like an ATM.
Oh, yes.
That was a fun day. I thought that was what you were going to share, but no, I will have to watch the Fair Slice one. And instead I'll encourage others. If you've seen the Fair Slice, spend your time watching Matt talk about why you shouldn't treat funders like an ATM, because I think that's a nice, like, additional step beyond what Colleen just brought up with relationships. I won't give it all away. You'll have to watch what Matt has to say.
Thank you. No, that's kind of you to point that one out. Anybody else? Any other thoughts? Anything you want to put in the chat? Further questions? Because this has really been.
Yes, I have another question, Matt.
Yeah.
Two things. I have a mentee right now for University of Pennsylvania who writes a lot of grants, so she's coming to Penn next year. So I'm her mentor. I'm trying to give her some suggestions. But one thing that she said, she's from Oregon. She said that Gates and Bezos have been giving a lot of, they live in Seattle, to a lot of money to nonprofits, because Biden is going to be taxing now the 2%. And one way that the 2%ers can get around that is by making a choice on who they're going to fund in order to cut their taxes. What do you think? Is that far-fetched, or is that?
So I think that it's a bigger, yes, well, Gates has been in the news, unfortunately, the Gates Foundation, just because of the divorce. It will likely change philanthropy in the short term. And Bezos with his divorce, and then Mackenzie Scott's gifts and grants that she's been making, they've been in the news quite a bit. So I think the bigger picture, rather than, I don't have details to weigh in specifically on either of the two, but for what it brings up in my mind is the big fish question. Nonprofits, well-intentioned board members, leadership see the big names, whether it's Gates, whether it's Bezos, whether it's Kellogg, Robert Wood Johnson, fill in the blank. Once worked with a great executive director who really thought the Bob Hope Foundation should give them money. They didn't meet the criteria, but that was the big fish for their work that they wanted. Fill in the blank. A nonprofit will always have a few, or at least one big fish that they think might be a good fit.
Now, I focus too much on those two, but with somebody who does write grants where I work, Philadelphia, there might be people who also would be included in that 2% or near that 2% who might be willing to fund more locally than they have in the past.
And that's true. And I think the catch is that group, right? Like Gates and Bezos, there's foundations, and that's their giving mechanism. So that's how they're going to get around taxes. And then eventually there will be some benefit for future payouts. Those that are really looking to change their tax situation are likely, maybe a few are going to create foundations, but it'll be more about the work that major donors are doing. And so I guess the one thing I didn't say, our firm only does grants. And that's been part of our thoughtful choice, because being based in New York State, If we were to step outside of grants, we are considered fundraisers that have to register. And we're not. We're grant writers, we're grant professionals. And so I don't really have anything to weigh in on in terms of major donors and how that'll change for the tax position. I'm just dangerously knowledgeable from what I might read online.
Well, one of the things that comes to mind as a response to that is to see yet further rise in donor advised funds.
Yeah, I think so.
Because these people will, donor advised funds, if you're not familiar, are run usually by the big brokerage houses, although they are a community foundation origin at their base. And so if you have a Fidelity account or you work with them somehow, they have a charitable fund you can put the money into that you would then advise the money to go out for. And that's a lot easier. There are some, it also though obfuscates some, it can obfuscate where the money is coming from to the charity. And it's a short-term answer to that for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other question is that I'm active with a group called Neighborhood Networks. We're having a budget meeting next Thursday night. And I was invited. The city, Philadelphia, just got $1 billion from the federal government. So we want to have some input on maybe some directions on where that might go. So, yeah, so those are kind of like my concerns right now. Thank you.
Yeah, well, and municipalities right now are overwhelmed. The block grants, I mean, any organization watching, it's an unprecedented level of federal funding. There has never been this much money in federal grant dollars ever. So it's an interesting and good problem to have, but it does add to the stress and also the concern that people are missing out on funding. There's a lot of FOMO in the grant world, fear that they're missing out on all the great opportunities. So that's great that you're involved in the Philadelphia process. It sounds like a great thing that they were awarded.
Well, one of the things that also crosses my mind is when an organization gets too much money and they don't know how to handle it, they haven't planned well. And that's where a good grant process is helpful in helping people kind of figure out what they want and what they're all about, knowing their why, so that they can handle those monies. Yeah. Well, hey, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Diane, this has really been tremendous to learn about your path, but also to get the kind of the inside scoop on the grant writing process for folks and allow folks to ask some questions. This has really been great. Next month, we'll be talking about social entrepreneurship with Tracy Allen, who has TVA Consulting, and she'll be bringing us, that'll be a pure Q&A time. So bring your Qs to get some great A's. I hope you enjoyed this presentation and better yet, got a lot out of it. Couple seconds, you'll see the links that were referred to in the conversation that we had in the chat. I put them on a panel for you to view. And otherwise, that's it from Nonprofit.Courses and great careers, and make it a great nonprofit day.